What I'd like to do tonight, and of course, I'm going to respond to anything that you guys have to say about college football, any comments, questions, suggestions. So it doesn't have to be about the BCS or the college football playoff, but that's our starting point, and that's what we're going to focus on. But whatever you guys want to talk about, I will respond to. And don't know how long I'm going to be able to stay online. But let's get started here, because what I did was I wanted to strike up a live stream. Didn't know what I was going to talk about. I sat down, opened the folder where you guys have sent me comments and suggestions, where I'm collecting those topics. And the first one I came to was review the BCS and the college football playoff and give your analysis. So we start with 1998. And here was the deal. Tennessee went undefeated. You could make all sorts of claims about how lucky they were to be undefeated, but they were undefeated. Tulane was undefeated, and I was just looking at their schedule, and Conference USA wasn't that bad then. Not anywhere close to the major conferences, but Louisville, East Carolina, Southern Miss, Army, Houston, Cincinnati, Memphis. That was Conference USA. It was a small conference with only 8 teams, and Tulane went undefeated. All right, 6 one-loss teams. Ohio State, preseason #1, consensus #1, wiped out a really good schedule, except Nick Saban and Sparty winning in Columbus 28-24. Wisconsin lost 1 game to Michigan. Didn't have to play Ohio State, only lost 1 game. Kansas State, undefeated in the regular season. The Big 12 championship game. Got them. Texas A&M wins 36-33, and the Wildcats take their first loss. Arizona and UCLA in the Pac-12. Of course, the Bruins went undefeated in the Pac-12, but lost the infamous game against Edgerrin James in Miami at the Orange Bowl, 38-35. I believe 39-35, something in that range. And Arizona lost their game to UCLA in the Pac-12. So UCLA won the Pac-12, but Arizona had the same overall record. So you got, and then, of course, the team that made it to the BCS championship game in its inaugural season was Tennessee, or was Florida State, with the 1 loss. And the 1 loss was against North Carolina State, 24-7. So the team that the BCS formula chose was the team that lost the worst game to the worst team, a 6-5 North Carolina State by 17 points. Who would you guys have placed in the national championship game? And this is my knock against the BCS, is that I don't necessarily have an issue with who made it. It's that there are always a collection of other teams that had as just a good of a track record. 98. Somebody was on probation. Was that Miami? NCIS Fanatic 21, of course, claims the national championship in 1998. Tulane was good. They were good, 12-0. And again, against a decent conference, you know, like a good group of 5 now, very much superior to the current Conference USA. Southern Miss, Louisville, East Carolina, Army, Houston, Cincinnati, Memphis. So there's 1998. I believe Ohio State was the best team. I would have to really dissect the records and the schedules to let you know if I believe that they had the best season out of those teams. But I believe they were better than Florida State, Kansas State, Wisconsin, UCLA, and to Arizona. That UCLA team lost and gave up all those points to Miami, and they lost the Rose Bowl. Kansas State lost to Purdue in the Alamo Bowl. And, of course, Florida State put up a bit of a fight against Tennessee. I think the final score was 23-16 with the 3rd-string quarterback in play. So there's 1998. 1999, of course, was the Michael Vick year, when Florida State beat the Hokies at the Sugar Bowl. It was a tight game at 29-28 until Florida State ripped off 17 consecutive points to close it out. 1999, Ron Dayne, of course, from Wisconsin, got a bit of a career award in winning the Heisman that year. He had a great season, but I think they really looked at the career of Ron Dayne, who at that point was the all-time rushing leader, and maybe still is. And yes, at the Superdome, at the Sugar Bowl, it was Florida State over Virginia Tech. Okay. Do we have any claims for anybody else? Virginia Tech went 7-0 in the Big East. Of course, it was the Big East. ACC was coming out of my mouth, but 7-0 in the Big East and 11-1 overall. That's after the loss to Florida State. So they were undefeated. Florida State was undefeated. So we had two undefeated teams, and Florida State won what was at the time a pretty weak ACC. Georgia Tech finished 5-3. They were in second place in the ACC, and they went 8-4 overall. Virginia, Clemson, Wake Forest, NC State, Duke, Maryland, North Carolina. Of course, none of the Big East teams that we now see in Boston College and Syracuse and Pitt. No Louisville. You had Maryland still there, of course. So Florida State wins a pretty weak ACC, but they go undefeated. And Virginia Tech wins the Big East, which wasn't great, but probably at the height of the Big East as a football conference. Virginia Tech, Miami finished second at 6-1. BC was good, 4-3, 8-4 overall. Syracuse, West Virginia, Pitt, Temple, and Rutgers. Remember when Temple was in the Big East? All right, the Big Ten, did they have a claim for anyone? Not really. 2 losses out of Wisconsin, 2 losses out of Michigan, although the Big Ten was really good. Wisconsin, Michigan, Michigan State, Penn State, Minnesota, Illinois, Purdue all finished in the top 25 after the bowl games. Wisconsin won the Rose Bowl. Michigan won the Orange Bowl over Alabama. Michigan State beat Florida in the Citrus Bowl that year. I don't have these games in front of me. I'm just reeling them off. I'm looking at the standings. And Penn State won the Alamo Bowl over Texas A&M that year, 1999. 4 teams finished in the top 11, but nobody had a claim to play in the national championship game from the Big Ten. Everybody had at least 2 losses. In the Big 12, Nebraska, 1999, Nebraska finished at 12-1. Kansas State finished 11-1. Nobody in the lesser conferences. Boise State 10-3, Southern Miss 9-3. The MAC, the Mountain West, the Pac-10 was a mess that season. So Stanford, with Ty Willingham as coach, won the Pac-10 at the time. And Stanford finished 8-4 and lost the Rose Bowl. Let's see, in the SEC, wow, this was not your same SEC. I remember it well. I was there covering these games at the time. Florida won the East. Alabama won the West. 99, Bama won they won, I believe they won the SEC championship game. Yes, 34-7. Florida finished 9-4 after they lost to the bowl game, Citrus Bowl, and Alabama lost to Michigan, so they finished 10-3. So there were no teams at the end of bowl play that were any better than Mississippi State's 10-2, and they only went to the Chick-fil-A Bowl, the Peach Bowl. So 1999 was clear-cut. I would still like to see a legitimate playoff. Even back then, if 2 teams were undefeated and somebody else had 1 loss, I still thought that there should be a legitimate championship game or a legitimate playoff, because that doesn't prove anything just because you're good and you won a weak ACC or Big East. But that's what happened that year, and that was clear-cut. Florida State 12-0 and Virginia Tech 11-0 in playing for a national championship. All right. Let's knock out one more season, then we'll wrap it up here. All right. 2000. And, of course, I'll check the live chat here in just a second. And maybe delete this live stream. I don't know. No sound for that. I'll pull it down and upload it again. Playing Homer. What with the Ohio State selection in '98? Country boy, I'm guessing that you're too young to have watched college football in 1998. That Ohio State team was loaded. They were loaded. They played in the best conference. I think we just outlined it. Most likely the best conference in the country. And they took care of everyone. They beat Michigan by 15 points. Yeah, they took on West Virginia and Missouri, who were two really good teams. I could go back to the seasons they put together, but they beat West Virginia and Missouri non-conference. They were really good. All right, yeah, it's pretty much of a done deal for 1999. Virginia Tech, Florida State, but I would still like to see a playoff. Now, if we would have had a playoff, we should look at that real quick. So if we would have had a 14 playoff like we do now, you would have to go with Florida State, Virginia Tech. Wow, this would be tough. You would have to go with Nebraska. Wow. Actually, the only two teams, major teams, that only had one loss going into the postseason play were in the same division. Nebraska and Kansas State both had one loss. So would you put this two teams in not just in the same conference, in the same division in the college football playoff? Otherwise, you would probably opt for Nebraska, who won the head-to-head against Kansas State, and Wisconsin, who won the Big Ten, which was the best conference, and the Pac-12 was bad, to go to the playoff. So the playoff would have been Florida State, the 1 seed, Virginia Tech, the 2 seed, Nebraska, the 3 seed, and Wisconsin, the 4 seed in 1999. I really don't see any other way to seed or select those teams that year. Alabama had 2 losses going into it. Mississippi State had 2 losses. Florida had 3 losses out of the SEC. And I will double check that Nebraska won the game head-to-head against Kansas State. Nebraska's loss was at Texas 24-20. Otherwise, they beat Kansas State 41-15. So yes, that's the slam dunk right there. Nebraska beat Kansas State head-to-head at home 41-15. They went on to beat Tennessee, if you recall that game, against T. Martin and company, 31-21 at the Fiesta Bowl, after they won the Big 12 championship against Texas 22-6. So if we want to backtrack real quick in 1998, because I like doing this, 14 playoff in 98 would have been Tennessee, the 1 seed, and then the seeding, who cares, who knows. Tennessee's the 1 seed. I would have made Ohio State the 2, Florida State the 3, and UCLA the 4 as the winner of the Pac-12, undefeated in conference play. Yeah, and then 1999, as we say, Florida State, Virginia Tech, Nebraska the 3, Wisconsin the 4. Now let's check out the 2000 season. Of course, this was the year that Florida State was supposed to repeat as national champions. They were a big double-digit favorite against Oklahoma in the national championship game at the Orange Bowl and were shut out. The defense scored a safety, 13-2. And let's see if there's anything on the live chat. Don't forget about our 28-9 win over Penn State in 1998. Yes, I remember the games there, NCIS Fanatic 21. 2000, Canes got robbed. Okay, yes, this is the infamous Washington beat Miami, Miami beat Florida State. So who, of course, went to the national title game? Florida State. They were the one team that, yeah. This is how crazy this is. Chris Wanke, your Heisman winner. And the Orange Bowl for the national championship played at Pro Player Stadium. And I gave you the final score of 13-2. South Carolina, just in looking at some notes from 2000, I remember this now. This was right before Luke Holtz took over. They broke a 21-game losing streak. which stretched back to 1998. Then they went 8-4. So this is Luke Holt's first year at South Carolina. South Carolina had lost 21 straight games. They had an 0-11 season in 1999. They turned it around, going 8-4 and winning the Outback Bowl. And Luke Holtz, say what you will about that guy's analysis on TV, which is a little shaky. But as a football coach, boy, he cleaned up Arkansas, North Carolina State, Minnesota, Notre Dame, South Carolina. Amazing. All right, on to 2000. So without going through the schedules, I'm going to guess that Miami was more dominant and played a tougher schedule than Washington, although the Pac-12 at the time, you had Washington tying Oregon and Oregon State for the Pac-12 championship. They all went 7-1. Stanford, UCLA, Arizona State, USC was no good. USC went 2-6. That was just, of course, just prior to Pete Carroll taking over. USC 2-6 in the Pac-12 or the Pac-10, and 5-6 overall, 5-7. So Washington, remember that Oregon State team that completely annihilated Notre Dame with T.J. Houshmandzadeh and Chad Johnson? That was in the Fiesta Bowl. Yeah, they went 11-1. Oregon State, imagine that, 11-1 under Mike Riley. All right, so Washington, we're guessing, yeah, they went to the Rose Bowl, so they must have beat Oregon State head-to-head. Otherwise, they would have not won the Pac-12 to go to the Rose Bowl. Washington's loss was against Oregon on the road at Autzen Stadium, 23-16. Their head-to-head with Oregon State was a 33-30 win at home. So Oregon State was that close to playing for a national championship, losing on the road in Seattle against maybe the best team in the country, Washington, 33-30. That's how close Oregon State in 2000 was playing for the national championship. This is what we do at Mark Rogers TV, is we highlight some of these things that have long since been forgotten, but just or a footnote in history of a team that was that close. And, of course, Washington beat with Tuiasa Sopo at quarterback, beat Drew Brees and company 34-24 at the Rose Bowl. So that's Washington's schedule against a pretty good Pac-12 where they played, of course, Miami and won at home 34-29. And they played two other ranked teams, Oregon, Oregon State. Miami that year lost a game to Washington. They beat a pretty good West Virginia team, 47-10 on the road. They beat Florida State, of course, 27-24. They beat Virginia Tech, 41-21. And Virginia Tech was number 2 in the country at the time. And, of course, they manhandled Florida in the Sugar Bowl, 37-20. So if I'm voting that particular year or putting together a system and I can only play 2 teams, my game is going to be Oklahoma and Miami. Now, if we had a 14 playoff, then we take care of everyone and we include the 3 teams all in the mix with 1 loss, Washington, Miami, and Florida State, with the undefeated team Oklahoma as the number 1 seed. I'd say give Washington the 2 seed because they beat Miami, Miami the 3, and Florida State the 4. The Big Ten was a muddled mess with a 3-way tie for first place, Michigan, Purdue, and Northwestern. Purdue went to the Rose Bowl because they beat Michigan. All right, why don't we knock out one more year? And that's, of course, 2001. And that was the year, Miami fans, you're going to be very happy to revisit, as you were dominant and Nebraska had no business playing in the national championship game. Checking the live chat. Love going back through past seasons, brings back a lot of fond memories and nostalgia. Yes, it does. I could do this all the time. I don't know if you saw the video we did with Steve Dace a few weeks ago from Michigan Podcast. going through his top 25 programs for the last 25 years. That's great stuff. Also, Mike LaValle from Last Word on College Football a couple nights ago, well, it was just last night, ran down an article that he's about to release with about unbreakable records in college football. That was fun. Dondre remembers when Kansas and Mizzou were good. Yeah, that would have been 2007. Although Mizzou won back-to-back Eastern Division championships just a few years ago under Gary Pinkel. Yeah, that Oregon State team was really that good. All right, let's carve up 2001. And it wasn't much of a championship game at the Rose Bowl. Eric Crouch won the Heisman. I'd be curious to see his statistics that year. I can't imagine that his passing stats were that good. He threw for 1,500 yards. Really? Okay, Eric Crouch won the Heisman in 2001. He threw 7 touchdowns. I'm not looking at a passing line from 1956. This is from 2001. I know he's a runner, but I expected to see better numbers than this. In 2001, in winning the Heisman, Eric Crouch threw 7 touchdowns and 10 picks. He completed 55% of his passes. So with those kind of numbers, even playing for the 1 or 2 team in the country and being the quarterback, I would expect his rushing stats just to be ridiculous. 1,800 yards, 25 touchdowns. They're really good. 1,115 yards, 5.5 average, and 18 touchdowns. But I don't know what his competition was in winning the Heisman Trophy that year, but I don't think he should have won the Heisman Trophy. I'm going to give this a quick look. What do you think? 2001. I want to see the vote totals with Eric Crouch. Just can't imagine. He won. This was a narrow vote. He only won 27% of the vote. All right, we'll have to pick that up another time. Put that on the list too. Heisman Trophy finishes. Who should have won that didn't win? Who won that shouldn't have won? I'm immediately going to 1956 and Paul Hornung. But here's another one that's going to make my list. Most likely, unless I can find no one else who had that kind of season. Eric Crouch, 7 touchdowns, 10 picks, and he wins the Heisman. All right. Miami slam dunk, best team in the country, 12-0. They're in. In the ACC, Maryland went 7-1 and 10-2, and I believe they lost the Orange Bowl to Florida. Illinois won the Big Ten. They weren't really that good. They got blown out by LSU in the Sugar Bowl. Yes, that Syracuse team went 6-1 and 10-3. Remember when Syracuse was good? Conference USA, owned by Louisville, 11-2, 6-1 in the conference. Of course, Colorado and Nebraska played that famous after Thanksgiving Friday game in which Colorado scored 62 points and proved that Nebraska should not have been playing in the national championship game. But who should have been playing? Well, that team could have been Colorado because, well, Colorado tied Nebraska for the division championship. Okay, that Colorado team had one more loss than Nebraska. They were 10-2 instead of 11-1, but they also went 7-1 in the Big 12, and they tied for the division championship and actually won it, I guess, because of the head-to-head. Did they beat Nebraska? Well, of course they beat Nebraska, the 62-36 game. So basically, Nebraska was awarded a spot in the national championship game, even though they lost to Colorado head-to-head by 26 points. They tied for a division championship, and Colorado, because they won the head-to-head, actually had to go to the Big 12 championship game and win. Not making a whole lot of sense there. Texas beat Washington in the Holiday Bowl. So they had 2 losses, but how did they fare against Nebraska? They must have lost that game. Is this possible? They didn't play Nebraska? So Texas and Nebraska didn't play. They should have played. And Texas lost the Big 12 championship game to Colorado 39-37. Otherwise, Texas might have played, and most likely with the Big 12 championship in their back pocket, most likely would have played in the national championship game, but they blew it 39-37. Oregon, of course, they won the Fiesta Bowl over Colorado. They went 7-1, won the Pac-12, went 11-1 overall. So in hindsight, Oregon is the best selection to have gone to the national championship game, although maybe the best team other than Nebraska or than Miami in college football in 2001 was Tennessee, who blew their chance of going to the national championship game against LSU in the SEC title game. But going into that game, Tennessee had 1 loss, and they were undefeated. No, they had 1 loss in the SEC. Then they lost the SEC championship game and beat Michigan to oblivion in the Citrus Bowl. And the other conferences were inconsequential. So 2001, let's replay this and give that second spot in the BCS championship game in place of Nebraska to Oregon. And Miami still kills them, but at least it's a game at halftime. And then they beat them probably by a similar score than they beat Nebraska, but Miami beat the Huskers 37-14, and it wasn't that close. They could have scored 60 points in that game in 01. So let's, Texas is close, Colorado's close, but I would have given it to Oregon to play for the national championship against Miami. Now, if we had a 14 playoff in 01, you would have gone with Miami as the 1 seed, Oregon as the 2, Colorado as the 3, and Nebraska as the 4. If you're going to give lopsided representation to one particular conference. Otherwise, you give Illinois the 4 seed. Can you imagine Illinois in a college football playoff? Illinois would have been the 4 seed as the Big Ten champion. They finished 7-1. All right, so we've gone through 1998, 99, 2000, and 2001, breaking down the BCS and why it didn't work ever. So far, we've got a Florida State-Virginia Tech matchup that made sense, of course, but there still should have been playoff for other teams to have a shot there. All right, what else are we coming up with? 2001 National Championship should have been Miami and Texas. Yeah, Texas had just lost the Big 12 championship game to Colorado, and Colorado had the same record. I don't know about that. I don't know how you could award NCIS Fanatic 21, award the national championship appearance to Texas over Colorado after the Buffs just won the Big 12 championship over Texas, and they have the same record. So you really can't do that. All right. Somebody's looking for 1993. What are we looking for in 1993? That was the season in which Florida State beat Notre Dame in South. No, that was the year that Notre Dame beat Florida State in South Bend. And Florida State still eventually went to win the national title, even though Notre Dame had the same record. So that didn't make a whole lot of sense either. The 1993 season, then we'll wrap it up. 93. Okay, Florida State, 12-1. Lost the 1 game against Notre Dame. Finished 8-0 in the ACC. West Virginia went undefeated in the Big East. Lost 1 game. Nebraska went undefeated in the Big 8. Remember the Big 8? And they lost 1 game overall. And, of course, that game was to Florida State in the Orange Bowl. They were playing for the national championship. Wisconsin, Ohio State both had a loss and a tie. They both went 10-1-1. Wisconsin won the Rose Bowl. Ohio State won the Holiday Bowl. And so in 1993, you also had in the SEC Florida, who was lambasted by Notre Dame in the Sugar Bowl after winning the SEC 28-13 over Alabama. Alabama was put on probation later, and those wins were stripped, but they basically went 8-3-1. And Auburn was the mystery team of 1993 because they went undefeated in the SEC, could not play in the championship game, and went 11-0, but could not play in postseason. They may have been the best team in the country, maybe. And Texas A&M went undefeated in the Southwest Conference, but they lost. Actually, Notre Dame in 93, yes, they beat Texas A&M in the Cotton Bowl against a pretty good Texas A&M team. And nobody was really a factor in the Pac-12 as Arizona won the conference at 6-2. UCLA went 6-2 and went to the Rose Bowl, but lost to Wisconsin. All right, so in 1993, this is the season that's kind of screwed up in regards to a national championship being awarded. So again, late in the season, Florida State goes to South Bend and loses to Notre Dame. They were number one at the time. They lost to Notre Dame. Charlie Ward throwing the ball into the end zone to win the game, but they couldn't pull it off. And Notre Dame takes over number one. But then the next week, Boston College comes in and beats Notre Dame 41-39. And how good was BC? They went 9-3 that year, finished number 13 in the country. So that knocked Notre Dame out for some inexplicable reason. Otherwise, you should have had a rematch of Florida State, and you should have had a rematch of Florida. Well, see, here's the issue. Nebraska's undefeated at that point, so they should be playing for the national championship. So Nebraska's in play as an undefeated team. So you need to basically break the tie between Florida State and Notre Dame. And so why wasn't Nebraska and Notre Dame playing in the Orange Bowl for the national championship? And Florida State should have been shipped to wherever, the Cotton Bowl, to play Texas A&M. So 1993 was screwed up, and Notre Dame should have had a shot to win the national championship. So they ended up with one loss. Florida State ended up with one loss, and Florida State lost to Notre Dame, but still won the national championship. So Florida State, they've caught a few breaks through the years. Yes, they have had a tremendous program, especially under Bobby Bowden in that 15-year stretch in which they never finished lower than fourth in the polls. But here we've got a 1993 season where they're given the nod over a team that they lost to go play for the national championship at the Orange Bowl. You've got 1998, in which they lost by 17 points to a 6-5 team and still got the nod to go play in the BCS championship game against Tennessee. And then in 2000, despite losing head-to-head to Miami, they were given the nod to go play the BCS championship game against Oklahoma and lost. So Florida State has benefited from a few split decisions of sorts as I check the live chat. Auburn gets no respect. They don't deserve any. JK, but they do live in Bama's shadow unless they win the Iron Bowl. And even then, 93, rough year for the BCS. So fill in, there was no BCS in 1993. This was the Bowl Coalition. The BCS started in 1998. So this was the situation in which each conference champion still went to their respective bowl games. The Big Ten winner and the Pac-10 winner played in the Rose Bowl, regardless of record, regardless of ranking. The Big 8 champion played in the Orange Bowl. The Sugar Bowl hosted the SEC winner. And that's the way it played out. The ACC was kind of a wild card at that point. They didn't have a bowl game. Their biggest bowl tie-in at that point was the Citrus Bowl. And as Florida State proved at that point, they could go somewhere else. The Bowl Coalition at least tried to match up 1 and 2 and did accomplish that. They would match up the 1 and 2 teams And these are the championships that produced Florida State defeating Nebraska in 1993. The year before, it produced Miami and Alabama playing 1-2, and Alabama pulling off the upset at the Sugar Bowl. 1994, even though Penn State was undefeated, Nebraska, as an undefeated team, won the national championship, defeating Miami in the Orange Bowl. So again, Nebraska is staying at home in their home conference bowl game, the Orange Bowl, and Miami being the team that was selected to play them as the number 2. Even though they weren't number 2, Penn State had to go to the Rose Bowl to play as the Big Ten champion. And then the last 2 years of the BCS, or the Bowl Coalition, was in 1995, Nebraska, Florida, which the Huskers blew them out 62-24. Amon Green still running for touchdowns right now as we speak. And 1996, in which Florida got a rematch against Florida State. They lost the regular season finale, but they were still 1-2 after Ohio State lost to Michigan, and they rematched at the Sugar Bowl, the home game, bowl game, postseason game for the SEC, and Florida won. So that was the old Bowl Coalition before the BCS kicked in 1998. Okay. So NCIS Fanatic 21 cleared it up with one line. It took me about 5 minutes to explain that. All right, 64-team playoff, Ricky. That would ensure the Hawkeyes would get in there. All right, I appreciate you guys jumping on the line. This was just an impromptu live stream. Just wanted to take a trip down memory lane and look at the college football seasons of 1998, 99, 2000, 2001. Then we jump back to 1993 thanks to fill-in. So you guys have a great night. I'm going to enjoy the family. You guys enjoy your loved ones or whatever you're into tonight. And I may be back tomorrow. Otherwise, I'm looking to track down Uncle Lou. We had decided on Sunday, but we're trying to find a time to get together on Sunday to discuss whatever's on his mind concerning college football. And I think Georgia's probably on his mind, and somebody might write a song someday about Georgia being on somebody's mind. So I appreciate you guys. We will catch you soon right here on Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football.